You want to get straight to the heart of things, right? Understand the big picture without wading through absolutely everything.
Yeah, cutting through the noise.
Exactly. And that's our plan today for Dublin, a city where, well, history feels really alive, but it's also buzzing with modern life.
It really is. We've gone deep into Dublin's story, from its very beginnings right up to its place on the world stage now.
And the aim is simple. Pull out the key moments, the really important stuff, and maybe some surprising facts that shaped it.
Precisely. Because the timeline here is, well, it's massive.
Over 1,000 years. From Vikings on the Liffey to this global city today. I suspect there are some twists we don't always think about.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so let's dive in. The beginning. Dublin and the Vikings, that's fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. Dublin really starts as a Viking settlement around 841 AD.
841 AD.
Yeah. And the name itself, Dublin, it means dark pool. Probably referring to a tidal pool where the River Liffey met the Poddle, near Dublin Castle, actually.
Dark pool. It connects it straight to the water, to the river.
Right from the start. And these weren't just raiders passing through. The sources we looked at really stressed their contribution.
In what way? What kind of contributions?
Well, they established it as a major hub for trade, for one thing. They set up governance structures, influenced the culture. They really built the foundations of the city as a significant place.
So turning maybe a smaller settlement into a proper trading port?
Exactly. Before them, there were Gaelic settlements, of course, but the Vikings really scaled it up. And what's interesting is the interaction, between the Norse settlers and the native Irish.
Right, it wasn't just conflict.
No, not entirely. Over time, you see this blending. Culture started to merge, creating this distinct Hiberno-Norse identity. You see it in language, in art.
A real mix right from early on. Okay, but the story doesn't stop with the Vikings. Fast forward a bit, 12th century, and another major player arrives. The Normans. Strongbow.
Yes, the Norman invasion. Another huge turning point for Dublin and Ireland generally.
How did they change things? What did the city look like after they arrived?
Well, think architecture for a start. They brought in Norman styles, early castles, more organized town planning, and crucially, Dublin becomes a major center of Anglo-Irish power.
Anglo-Irish, so English settlers establishing themselves.
Essentially, yes. Descendants of the Norman and later English settlers, Dublin becomes the heart of English administration in Ireland.
Okay, and you can imagine that creates tension pretty quickly, right? Between these newcomers, the Anglo-Normans, and the native Irish population?
Definitely. Issues over land, over laws. The Norman feudal system was completely different to the Gaelic way of doing things.
So immediate friction points.
Yeah, and it really marks the beginning of a long, often difficult relationship with English influence growing and native Irish autonomy reducing.
Which sadly seems to lead into some really tough centuries. The 16th, 17th centuries sounds like a period of intense conflict. Religious, political.
Very much so. Dublin, as the seat of English power, was right in the thick of it. You had major conflicts between the Protestant English rulers and the mostly Catholic Irish population.
Were there specific events?
Oh, yes. The sources detail numerous uprisings. The 1641 rebellion is a big one, an attempt to overthrow English Protestant rule. These conflicts and how they were put down left deep scars on the city.
You can almost picture a city constantly braced for trouble. But then the 18th century arrives, and suddenly we're talking about the Georgian era. Growth, elegance. It seems like such a contrast.
It is a striking contrast. But sometimes, after periods of intense conflict, you get these bursts of development, maybe some relative political stability, combined with growing trade.
And that fueled a building boom.
A massive one. This is when you get those famous wide streets, the beautiful squares, the grand Georgian townhouses that Dublin is still known for.
Well, like Marion Square, Fitzwilliam Square, those areas.
Exactly. And major public buildings, too, like the Custom House. Dublin Castle also saw significant expansion then.
And it wasn't just bricks and mortar, was it? It became a cultural hotspot, too.
Absolutely. A real intellectual center. Think Jonathan Swift, writing Gulliver's Travels, Oliver Goldsmith, Edmund Burke. Dublin was buzzing with literary and political thought, a major European city.
Sounds quite golden in a way.
In some ways, yes. But, and this is crucial, that prosperity wasn't for everyone. Our sources are clear on this.
The underlying tensions again.
Right. Power and wealth were concentrated heavily in the hands of the Protestant elite, the ascendancy. The Catholic majority still faced significant discrimination, legally and socially.
So beautiful facade, but deep divisions underneath.
Precisely. And that inequality is, well, It's the seed for future problems.
Which brings us to the 19th century. Upheaval, nationalism. This sounds like where those divisions really come to a head. Hardship, too.
Immense hardship. Poverty was widespread. And then the Great Famine in the 1840s, just catastrophic.
How did the famine specifically hit Dublin?
Huge death toll, yes, but also massive emigration. People fleeing the country, many through Dublin. It changed the city's makeup and massively intensified resentment against British rule. You see Dublin becoming the absolute center of nationalist feeling.
The push for home rule.
Exactly. The demand for self-government really gathers steam throughout the later 19th century, with Dublin as its focal point.
So the pressure is building and building, leading into the early 20th century. And that's when things get really dramatic, right? The path to independence.
Absolute pivotal. Yeah. The event everyone knows is the 1916 Easter Rising.
Right, centered in Dublin.
Yes, Irish Republicans staged this armed insurrection, aiming for a fully independent Ireland. It was centered on key buildings in Dublin, like the GPO.
But it was suppressed, wasn't it, fairly quickly?
Militarily, yes, it was suppressed. But its impact was enormous. The execution of the leaders, the heavy-handed British response, it galvanized public opinion right across Ireland in favor of independence.
So, a military failure, but a huge political victory in a strange way.
You could definitely argue that.
Yeah.
It shifted public mood dramatically. And that leads directly into the Irish War of Independence a few years later.
And
ultimately, the establishment of the Irish Free State in 1922. And Dublin, which had been the center of British administration, now becomes the capital of this new independent Irish state.
A profound shift in identity for the city.
Huge, a completely new chapter.
And that chapter continues. The sources mention, some economic struggles in the mid-20th century.
Yes, Ireland faced economic difficulties for several decades after independence.
But then another transformation, the Celtic Tiger years. Dublin becomes this modern, globalized city.
That's right. Late 20th, early 21st century, Ireland made a very deliberate push to attract international investment, especially in tech and finance.
And Dublin was the main beneficiary.
By far. It became a major European hub for huge multinational companies. This brought rapid economic growth, maybe too rapid in some ways, but it fundamentally changed the city again. Lots of new development, a much more international feel.
Which brings us pretty much to today, a city where, as you said, the history is layered right on top of this modernity. You can see a medieval tower next to a glass office block.
Exactly. And that past isn't just in the buildings. The literary heritage, for instance, Joyce, Beckett, Yeats, it's still incredibly potent. It's part of Dublin's global image, its cultural influence.
So the past is very much present.
It really is. And you can explore it, can't you? The museums, the historical sites. They all tell parts of this long, complex story we've been tracing, from the Vikings onwards.
It really paints a picture of resilience, doesn't it? And constant adaptation.
I think that's a great way to put it. Resilience, creativity, and a really strong sense of identity that's evolved through all these different phases.
So if we had to boil it down, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into Dublin's history?
I'd say it's the sheer dynamism. Dublin's story is this constant interplay of different cultures clashing and blending: Viking, Gaelic, Norman, English. Periods of terrible conflict followed by bursts of growth and creativity. It's left this incredibly rich, complex legacy.
It really does make you think. When you consider that whole journey, starting as a Viking dark pool, becoming a colonial capital, fighting for independence, and now this thriving global city, what does Dublin's story suggest about, the spirit of a place, its ability to keep reinventing itself while somehow holding onto its past? That's definitely something to chew on.
Food for thought.
Join us next time for another deep dive.